Hopkins University Masters in Science Writing program and advanced academic programs. Today's event features alumni from the Masters in Science Writing program who will provide an inside look at telling the government's science stories. My name is Peter Huggins and I'm the event producer. Please note, today's program will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the MA in Science Writing playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function and we'll answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion of the event. With that, I will turn the event over to the host of our program, Melissa Hendricks-Joyce.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome everybody. I am so delighted to be with you this evening. This is an event that I've had in the back of my mind for a few years. Some years ago, I started looking through our alumni list and noticed that how many folks work for one federal agency or another as writers or editors. And I thought that was very interesting and that it could be illuminating to have a conversation with some of our alumni. So I'm glad to have folks joining and thank you for your interest, everybody out there in the audience. While I'm talking, and I promise I won't talk this entire hour, we want to hear from our panelists. I'm wondering if there are folks in the audience who themselves work for the federal government in writing or editing positions. And if you do, please feel free to type a hello in the chat in the name of your agency and maybe your job. It would be interesting to see if there are other folks out there in the at the alphabet soup of the government. I know we have alumni with DOE, the Forest Service, NIH, NASA, NOAA, EPA, and NIST, and I'm probably leaving out some. In any case, I am so pleased to welcome our 4 alumni, and I will briefly introduce them to you and then get on with some questions. And if you out there in the audience have your own questions, please pop them in the chat and we will get to all of those during this hour. In no special order, I am very pleased to welcome our panelists. First, Catherine Evans. Catherine has a doctorate in neuroscience along with a degree from our program, and she's applied this double whammy of expertise to her work as a writer and editor covering biomedical science for the National Institutes of Health. And I also have to put in a plug for our marvelous new student publication, The Science Writer. Catherine is one of the magnificent editors for that publication. Thank you, Catherine. Next, we have Matt Dozier. Matt, while attending this program, was a writer, editor, and social media coordinator for the National Marine Sanctuary System, which is a department within NOAA. And since 2015, he's been with a different agency, the Department of Energy, where he works for the digital team and is a host and producer of the terrific podcast, Direct Current. And we also have Matt Ward. Just so happens that half of our panelists are named Matt. Matt Ward is another alum who has experience with different arms of the federal government. Early in his career, Matt was a technical writer for the U.S. Army, and he is now an editor at the NASA Office of Inspector General. And finally, I'm delighted to have Jennifer Huergo join us. And Jennifer has worn many different hats in the writing communications field, including work as a science writer for the Hopkins Applied Physics Lab and for the Office of Naval Research. And she now directs the Office of Public Affairs at the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, or NIST. Thank you, Matt, Catherine, and Jennifer for joining us. And so let's get started. My first question pertains to an impression I have, and it's probably an unfortunate stereotype, but I'm guessing that maybe some other folks have this impression as well, which is that working for the government, being a writer for the government is, for lack of a better word, routine or beige or dull or bureaucratic. Everything is filed in triplicate, and people wear pocket protectors and carry around slide rules, that old-fashioned image. And I'm guessing I have the wrong impression, knowing you dynamic folks, but I'm wondering if you've encountered this impression and if it's a misconception about government writing, and if there are any myths about working as a writer for the government that you would like to use this opportunity to dispel. And I will open it up for anyone who wants to attack that first.
Yeah, who wants to go? It's a really good question. I'm happy to start. I mean, and I can come at this from the side of things, you know, when it came to, this will be the first time I mention the podcast I work on for the Department of Energy, but it's called Direct Current. And when we started it in 2016, we were met with stun and shock from media outlets and other folks who are like, wait, the Department of Energy is putting out a podcast and it's good? Like, how can this be, you know? And that's the, you know, approaching podcasting from just a writing standpoint, which is kind of how I always have. It's, you know, just another form of the craft. And so, you know, this was something that was completely baffling to a lot of folks who are like, no, the government doesn't do interesting or cool or lighthearted or you know, it's dull, it's beige, it's flat and boring, and you know, inverted pyramid, just the facts kind of stuff. And you know, so taking that chance to kind of try and broaden the horizon of what government communication can look like, you know, I think, you know, that was a surprise to a lot of people at the Department of Energy, in addition to outside. So it's been an interesting kind of way of exploring, you know, different modes that do, you know, we can actually share the mission, share the work that's happening, and not be boring, or try not to be boring.
That's a good motto. Try not to be boring. That's wonderful. Jennifer, I know I'm turning to you next because I know the name of your agency, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, might get a bad rap, in particular, Nist.
Yeah, we absolutely, I think when you see standards in the title, people don't expect, but Nist is doing some amazing research all the time. It's really, I love working at Nist because of the breadth of our portfolio of research. I mean, everything from cybersecurity to quantum physics. We put out a really interesting story today about this week about measuring time dilation at the scale of millimeters. Put out a really cool video talking about like thinking that government workers don't get to do exciting things. For example, we have Emmy award-winning videographers that I work with, folks that have put together videos about the science that we do, and they've won Emmys. You know, it's through the local Emmy system, and really impressive representation across the country. But there's a lot of exciting ways that we can express, you know, express our work. Years ago, I think Nist had a newsletter they put out, and maybe it was a bi-weekly newsletter. And now you just have so many options with blogs, with podcasts, as Matt mentioned, with just different formats, and social media has given us a lot of leeway, and the videos, you know, having all of those different platforms and social media. So there's a lot of really exciting ways. Like our office always tries to, we don't do what we've always done. We always want to see what's coming down the pike. What's the new way to share what we do? And so we've gotten lots of opportunities to experiment and to try different styles, longer form writing, shorter form. I think that people might think that it's boring for the government, but there's in the places that are doing scientific research. I mean, if you're this crowd, right, that's never boring. And you get to learn about science or advancements before anybody else does, right? That's one of the cool things about being a science writer.
Yeah, that is cool. And I'm glad you mentioned social media. I want to come back to that point in a little bit and remind me if I forget. Catherine, what about you? Is my impression correct from your experience?
I would say no. I would say that the mission of our communications office is sort of the opposite of being boring. We want to be as engaging as possible, and we want to put out content that will be interesting and easy to absorb and, engaging to the public. We want to, educate the public about our science and make it as interesting as possible. And, a key part of that is, like Jennifer just mentioned, having a variety of methods to do that. So whether it's written form or video or other forms of multimedia, social media, we want to get out information out there that we can really inform and engage the public with. And I would also add that going along the lines of misconceptions, a colleague who joined our office recently, he had worked in communications in other government agencies, in a university newsroom, in the private sector, all over the place. And he seemed really surprised that science writers at NIH were not just technical writers. Now, there are technical writers, but science writing at NIH is often sort of a journalistic style, and he seemed surprised about that. So that kind of goes along with one of the misconceptions that I've noticed.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I have noticed that in perusing the job listings in the USAJOBS.gov site, that there are many openings for technical writers, which maybe we can get into that in a little bit, what the distinction is in terms of the government size anyway, between technical writing and writing, if you will. But I want to hop over to Matt Ward first to see if you, what you think of this vision of the government writer.
I think that world is out there with the pocket protectors. I think that does exist, right? But for me, it's kind of been a long process in trying to get back to being a journalist, which is how I started. And so it's an easy answer because I work at NASA. Everything's cool that we write about, but it's not always in my day-to-day work. A lot of times the thing that is most exciting and sort of antithetical to the picture you painted is just how big is the problem that we're trying to take part in solving for what I do, because what we do is evaluate programs and write reports. So sometimes the problems that I've participated in working on solutions to aren't going to space at all. It's environmental cleanup was one of the big ones that just the report and the work fell together in a way that it felt like we were doing really important work. And that's the thing that I think is most exciting. And that's always there everywhere in government. Everywhere I've been, there's people who are making a difference. And I think that sort of the civil service component of it is something I came to understand after I already worked for the government.
Interesting.
But, it's there. Yeah, if you want to cruise and nap and not, be really hard to fire, there's always those people. And we have that in the federal government.
In every job though, right?
But yeah, man. Yeah. Yeah. But so I would definitely say that when you get a chance to work on something that you feel strongly about, it's exciting.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and kind of illuminates the broader kind of, when you talk about misconceptions. I mean, it's just like there's misconceptions, sure, about government science writing, but it's more even about government and government workers, government, the role that agencies play, the role that the folks that do these jobs and do this research play. And in some ways it's so much more interesting and more exciting than it's ever really made out to be. I mean, across Department of Energy, we've got so many different people working on so many different problems. Like you talk about, it's about solving problems at sometimes this grand scale, from environmental cleanup to the future of the grid and that kind of thing. And every person you meet that works on this stuff is fascinating and committed and talented and smart, and those kinds of stories don't always reach the public. They don't reach beyond the next cubicle over. Sometimes it's something that I think we play or try to play a role in helping educate the public, helping people understand, not just the work that's happening, because the work is very important, but the people doing the work, and the things that motivate them, I think is one of the valuable services that science writers can provide, right? Because I mean, you provide this translation and also illuminating the people behind the work in a way that can help people connect with it and understand, okay, where are my tax dollars going, and who are they going to, and what is the benefit, and how does that drive these people?
Those are really interesting points, and which raises some other questions that we typically ask of all writers, which is, where do you get your ideas for writing, and how much autonomy do you have in making those decisions? And I'm just curious how those questions play out in your roles for the government. So I'm asking all four of you. Let me start with you, Catherine. Are you given assignments? Is there a set list of stories you're expected to work on, or do you propose your articles?
I say in large part, the stories that we create are driven by me and our other science writer. We have the autonomy to sort of find the stories, go out there and find them, and pitch them to our supervisors, and then develop them. But we also do get assigned stories occasionally. The scientists, our scientists in our institute often share with us when they have a new paper coming out that might be really, newsworthy, and there may be other leadership types in the institute that find a particular story worth telling. So, it's kind of a top-down process sometimes, but then a lot of it, we have kind of a unofficial, informal quota of stories that we want to put out each month. And so to meet that quota every month, there has to be a lot from the science writers in terms of coming up with the story ideas.
Okay. And your writing is appearing on the website, in various publications that NIH puts out and the like?
Yeah, on our website, as well as NIH has a few different sort of science news publications that we pitch stories to, press releases, and yeah, that kind of thing.
Okay. I'd like to hop back over to Matt Ward, though, because it occurs to me that some folks might not understand what the NASA Inspector General is. It's a little bit of a mysterious office. Could you tell us a little bit about what it is and what you do, like what your typical workday is like?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm mostly editing. So in answer to the question you just asked, not at all. I don't what I write at all because I barely write unless I'm fixing something that's already been written. So everything I do is editing. But there's 78 inspector generals across the government. And pretty much every major agency you can think of has one. And they're basically there to provide oversight and evaluation of how the agency does its business. So, for instance, the Inspector General at the Department of Defense, everything else at the DoD is huge. There are a couple thousand people. And large part of what IGs do is investigative, like inside affairs, actual people making laws and trying to, our investigators are out trying to find contract fraud and whatever else it is that goes on and recommend prosecution. But the other side, the other half of what inspector generals do is more evaluative. So essentially we put teams of people for a year to look at contracts in the SLS program where NASA's building a new rocket, and we'll write a report at the end. So we try to figure out if there's stuff we can do to improve operations. And every one of those reports needs help from an editor. So the IG community across the government has a lot of writing and editing jobs. And the grandfather is GAO, the Government Accountability Office. That's sort of where editing and government in the US started. And they really set the standard for the quality of writing for the general public on these various topics and in this evaluative problem-solving way. So between GAO and the 78 IGs, there's lots of writing and really editing jobs out there.
Okay. And by the way, in preparation for this evening, I tried to pull some little fun factoids about government writers. And I searched high and low to see if I could find the number of writers employed by the federal government. I got figures somewhere between 700 and 1,000, which seems really low to me. So I have no idea how accurate those are. But here's a fun factoid. Today, on the USAJOBS.gov site, there are 40 job openings with writer in the title, including technical writer, editor, and digital media specialist. So if folks out there are interested, hop on that site and check it out. There are jobs all over the country, federal jobs for writers.
I would just like to add that there's also the other place to look is public affairs specialist. That's where a ton of the writers will be found. Like all the science writers at Nist are public affairs specialists.
That's great to know. Yeah, it's one of these little secrets of the trade. Absolutely. Jennifer, what about you? So your job is very different from Matt's, and I'm curious about what a typical day is like for you.
Sure. It's pretty busy these days since I became last year the director of the office. But for our writers, as I said, they're public affairs specialists. And we're set up kind of like a news office. So the writers each have their own beat. And so we have someone who covers the engineering laboratory within this, or the communications technology laboratory, all these several laboratories. They're covered by a beat writer who's responsible for understanding what the work of that laboratory and getting to know the people and keeping an eye on what research they're working on, what big publications. We're very much, our news stories that we publish on our website every day are driven by, what's coming out in Nature, what's coming out in Science, what's coming out in some more niche publication that is really important to certain people in the world, certain types of work. And so the writers keep track of that. And then we have weekly meetings where they'll actually pitch their stories, and they'll say, hey, I heard so-and-so is working on the IPCC, that new climate change report. And so, okay, well, let's look at this. Do we have time to write a story? Is this news? So we'll do like a normal pitch meeting, I guess, is go back and forth with different ideas, talk about, do we have photography? Do we need photography? would this make a really good video? What kind of video? So we try and beat the ideas around as a group. And then there are 3 of us who make the editorial decisions. And we say, yes, okay, let's go forward. You know what? This is better told from the scientist perspective. Let's make that a blog post or a Q&A on our blog. Or, ooh, they didn't tell us about this in enough time. So all they're getting is a quick email to reporters to say, hey, the report is out, but they're not getting a full-on news story because they forgot to tell us, which I'd say our folks spend a lot of time trying to keep up on what's coming out and staying ahead of things, because the researchers are so excited about their work. They're so into it. They completely forget to tell us a lot of the times. And that's, I think, pretty common across public affairs offices in my experience. I was actually at the Office of Naval Research, so shout out to Warren. Don't know you, but yeah, ONR was great. That was a great place for science writing.
Very good. So interesting. And does your job ever involve crisis control?
Yes. I mean,
Can
you
you
have
talk-
7,000 people that work at Nist. So any organization
Mhm.
where you have a bunch of humans, someone's going to have a bad day, something's going to go wrong. We had an interesting one where a researcher woke up in the morning and thought to herself, did I leave that cap tightened on that bottle, that, flask in the fume hood, or did
On
I
that
leave it
nuclear
loosened like I
device?
meant to? And so she had to call a bomb squad and say, I'm not sure of the condition of that. There may be under pressure. And we found out that the local bomb squad will tweet on their way to your facility. So that was interesting. So yeah, we learned that, okay, we need to be ready within 20 minutes to say the public's safe, they're not. We did have a big incident. You mentioned nuclear. We did have a very unfortunate incident last February. It's just been a year that there was a problem with we have a small new research reactor. And so that was, wow, 9:15 in the morning, I get a phone call from a guy. I hear alarms going off in the background and he says, this is not an alert. So that was everybody pulling together. Okay, what do we know? What can we tell people? I spent much of the day thinking I was 5 minutes away from putting out more information, and you can get caught up in that. So crisis communications is an important part of the job, but our policy at Nist is to be open and transparent. So we mess up, we tell you, and we keep informing you until you're bored with us, is our policy. But that, a lot of our crisis communication can involve explaining the science. Okay, what chemical was in that flask? What hazard might it pose to somebody? Why are we bringing in the bomb squad? But then it's a lot of collaboration, right? It's not just me who can explain this stuff. So I'm bringing in subject matter experts. I'm bringing in our attorney, who's really fantastic at making sure you're saying exactly what you mean to say. And so we'll, as a group, figure out, okay, how do we respond to this? How do we give people everything we know to be true? And we're not guessing on anything. We absolutely know this is accurate, because we don't want to ever say more than we know is accurate. And in a crisis, people mishear or they misunderstand, and you have to be really careful. So it gets exciting at the time.
I'm kind of starting to sweat listening to you describe it. I'd like to switch gears just a little bit. We have a terrific question from Mary, who is asking whether you as writers ever produce full stories for non-governmental publications or venues other than press releases. And I'll just expand that to include government publications too. Are you writing feature stories, for a magazine your agency puts out, for example? What do you do that's beyond the press release? And I'll toss that out to anybody who wants to jump in.
I haven't done anything outside of the department. I don't know if that's true for others.
So there are a few, I think I mentioned this, there's a few news publications at NIH that publish, science advances and that are public facing. And so there are opportunities to pitch those and write for them and get a byline. But if the question is about non-governmental outlets, no.
Yeah, I guess that brings up the idea of freelancing for other publications are.
And that is an option. You can freelance as a federal employee. You'll want to, before you start doing that, you'll want to check with the ethics office of your agency to make sure there are no conflicts. And you don't want to do that on work time. It's absolutely on your own time. But in our office at Nist, we do have the opportunity not to write, as part of your job, you're not writing for outside publications, but you certainly can do different formats. Like Catherine said, that like we have feature articles that we write, longer and shorter form videos people get into. So there's lots of different styles. It's not all just a press release.
Yeah. Okay.
I will say I have done some freelance stuff several years back for Alert Diver magazine, which is the scuba diving industry publication. So had to make sure it was, disconnected from my job. Made sure to run that by the appropriate channels. But yeah, it is possible to do some official type freelancing and do some stories on the side.
Sure. I love that title, Alert Diver. So where do folks find, creative fulfillment in your job? Do you find, since leaving our program many years ago where, you kind of had free reign to try out different forms, to explore your creative writing or whatever interested you. Do you find those opportunities exist in your government job?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. I would say absolutely. As I mentioned, we have different formats and styles that we try and help educate the public on what it is what Nist does. But also, as I mentioned, the crisis communications, that's challenge, that's problem solving. So my job now, when I was media relations director, now public affairs director, it's a lot of problem solving. And how do I help people reach their goals of communication? And so because people will come to you and say, I need a press release, I need a press release. You're like, nah, you don't need a press release for that. You need something completely different. Or you need to just go give that talk to the 10 people who will understand that topic. This is not a press release. We're not going to try and get you in the New York Times or anything like that. So there's definitely a lot of creative challenges. And like I said, our videographers have won Emmys based on the work they've done at Nist, describing the work we do. So there's a lot of, and there are plenty of opportunities for creative, I think, in the government. Probably depends on the agency. We're non-regulatory, so we may have some more leeway too. We have a different relationship with the world than other agencies do.
Great.
Yeah, DOA is in a similar position of being primarily a funder of research. So we have a lot of different stories to draw from. You were talking earlier about where the sort of like direction comes from, and I work on the digital team in our Office of Public Affairs, and so we have essentially like a small core team that's devoted to social media, the website, and back in 2016, a few of us were like, I think we could start a podcast. But we all listen to podcasts and have some writing skills and some various multimedia skills back then, and we were like, yeah, I think we could do that. And we were given the leeway to fail. They're like, yeah, go for it. If you have to do the rest of the work that you're supposed to be doing, and if it doesn't go well, we're not going to keep doing it. But it seemed like it went pretty well, and so it gave us the opportunity to experiment and try some new things, and telling stories in a different way through a different medium, but also like in different formats. And from the beginning of starting this podcast, we have had quite a few different episodes that dabble in some like kind of like fiction, some like humor. The first episode had like a parody of like Ira Glass and This American Life, which I think is part of what made a lot of people scratch their heads and take notice. But one of the episodes we did, we wanted to do essentially like a debunker about nuclear energy, because I mean, of the things that DOE deals with that have a lot of misconceptions, there's they abound when it comes to nuclear. And so we were like, let's tackle some of the big ones. And we wanted to use some art and some clips from The Simpsons, because they've got some really like classic, when you picture nuclear energy, what are you picturing? And our office of general counsel was like, no, you can't do that. But one of the lawyers was also a really big Simpsons fan. We're like, okay, well, you come on the episode and we can reenact or like have some commentary about about these episodes that feature nuclear energy really prominently, and we can sort of talk about it as a cultural critique sort of thing. And she was game, and so we were able to kind of like weave that in maybe a little different way than we'd originally expected, but I think it made it more fun and more interesting. And we've been able to kind of experiment with that. And so, I think it's really cultural, creatively fulfilling to be able to experiment and also just to get to talk to a lot of really interesting people and talk about the work they do and their lives and their jobs.
It's fantastic. Yeah. So multimedia and social media are just expanding, obviously. I mean, they'll be with us for a long time, forevermore. And I'm wondering what you folks think about the future direction of multimedia and social media. And one reason this is on my mind is I attended a webinar yesterday where the speaker said, if you're going to invest in one platform, it should be TikTok, particularly for educators. I was a little surprised to hear that. Our program does not have a TikTok channel, but maybe maybe we should. Any thoughts out there on, what the new direction should be, areas of media that you personally would like to explore with your agency, or that you've started to explore? What do you think is the new frontier?
Who else on the call deals with social media? Okay, so Jennifer and Catherine. Okay, yeah. So
Catherine, tell us a little bit about how you're using social media and where the direction you see it going.
So social media is integral to what we do. It's very important to us and NIH as a whole, and will be increasingly so. So any new content that we produce also goes out on social media. We use Twitter as sort of the main conveyance of our content. We also are on LinkedIn to get out information about careers and training opportunities for researchers. We also use YouTube to host our videos. We are a small office, so we haven't been able to implement social media to the fullest extent that we could. Like, we don't have Facebook or Instagram, which NIH has found to be key to engaging certain NIH audiences. But yeah, I mean, social media is really important to us because it helps us engage and grow our target audiences, and then also be able to learn from them what content works and what content doesn't, which then further informs what kind of content we continue to create. And in terms of TikTok, it's funny you mention it. I'd say that sort of one drawback about social media at NIH is that we have some pretty tight IT security standards, which can limit adoption of certain emerging social platforms, including TikTok. We still have not been able to get approved to use TikTok because of that. So there can be some limitations when it comes to social media, but overall, it's key and inherent to everything we do.
Interesting. And Jennifer, you're nodding your head. I guess you agree. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, absolutely. At Nist, we're lucky. We do have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Reddit. We don't have the bandwidth to add. So we kind of watched, as things as TikTok or previously Snapchat, we're like, oh no, we can't handle anymore. But as Catherine said, it's really helpful. That's each one of those has a different audience that we try and tailor our work to, or our postings to. And we've seen that pay off in engagement and growth. LinkedIn has really come from behind there. And now we get a ton of engagement through our LinkedIn platform. And it's a really good way for us. One of the things that the social media accounts let us do is share news or share the stories and share the people, interesting facts about the people working there, kind of get across the passion of our researchers, because otherwise our news stories or our news releases are tied to, well, this accomplishment, right? We publish this report, or we publish this study. And so there are a lot of early career people who we might miss out on, who aren't the lead author on some of these papers. And so it's been a way for us to engage a more diverse audience than we might otherwise, right? We can show off a different generation of people, frankly, the ones that are still working their way up, our postdocs. And so through social media, it's been really nice to be able to kind of put faces and personalities behind the research that we're doing that you wouldn't put in a news release. We can show off a bit more that there's actual people and they're total geeks and they love what they're doing. They're passionate about it, and they're happy to share it with you. And it's a beast to feed, right? It's really hard. So, you need the imagery, you need photographers or graphic designers, and then people who are skilled in science, in writing for those platforms. We have a full-time person who does all of that, but she really depends on our science writers to help her out, to do a lot of the work. And then she usually cleans it up because she's better at it than the rest of us. But if you're a science writer now, even if you're a journalist, right, you have to go on social media and promote your own work. So that's part of our job too. Our science writers do use social media.
It's a special skill for sure. And I see we have a comment from Rachel who says, by the way, the National Park Service has bomb social media content. A lot of great photos there. And I do want to there are a couple of questions there. I do want to get to them. One relates to something I would like to ask everybody, which I think some folks in the audience might be wondering, which is some just practical advice for finding and securing a job as a writer editor with the government. So I mentioned the USAGOV site, and Jennifer, you mentioned one other as well. The application for a federal job can be very daunting and somewhat mysterious. So I'm interested in hearing your advice to folks out there who might be considering applying. How do you conquer that beast of an application? And also, what are some skills? How can an aspiring writer best prepare for a job of this sort? Find a job and best prepare. And maybe we'll start with Matt, because you are shaking your head. Matt Ward.
I've been thinking about this all day. I saw a question, are the people on the panel government or contractor, actual federal employees? I'm a federal employee. I'm not sure what everyone else is. My impression is that we all are federal employees. And so I also saw a question about pay range. And so it's not really as much of a mystery as you might think it would be, and I also would say USAJOBS has gotten a lot better in the past since I've been doing it. So I think you have to start with a more basic question of what you want to do and what your goals are than how to break in. Because, for instance, like I would say I really loved being a newspaper reporter, and then the rest of my career has been formed by that. And a lot of my colleagues when we all, you know, in my generation bombed out of that low pay and the jobs just kept going away and going away, a lot of people went into public affairs, and that's a natural fit. And for me, it's something I never wanted to do. And that's not to say anything bad about it as a profession, but I think the other path for me was technical writing. And so from there, I knew I wanted to, I saw that there were government jobs. I did, if you go on USAJOBS and you just look for writer jobs, like Melissa's saying, look at what they pay and see what's out there, and recognize that you're probably not going to walk in from the street to like a GS-13 writing job, but there are many of them out there. And so you just have to ask yourself, how am I going to get there? And I think the answer could be that it could be easier to get a job as a contractor at first, and then you start to have more connections and visibility into if you really wanted to work for one of the agencies as opposed to just being a contractor. That's one way in. As far as security clearance, I saw a question about that. It just depends where you work. But within USAJOBS, if you're looking at jobs on there, you can tell if the jobs are open to the public or not, right? So a specific job that you see that sounds right for you, to me, is the best thing that you could do. Like, this sounds like a good job for me, I'm going to go for it, as opposed to trying to research keywords and gin up your resume and get good at the system. But also the way to get good at the system is to apply for jobs. But if a job is open for 4 days, they're probably not going to call you. But if the job is open for 2 weeks or a month, there's much better. It's just a question of how wide open is the door, right? And you're looking for an open door. And so if the job has a listing where it says GS 9 to 11, that means they're looking for people. So they want to be able to, if you come through the door and you've never worked for the government before, they're probably not going to put you in at the 11, but they might love you and want to put you in at the 9. Once you're in, you know? And so that's the thing. It's two things. It's getting in the door. And then once you're in, whatever you come at a 9, you look at 11 is kind of the next step. You just sit there and start looking at 11s until you see something that fits. And then we all just work our way up. So these are some of the things I'm thinking of when you see a job that's listed at a range of salaries. So what range? You see a job that's open for weeks at a time. And I know other people here have had this experience. You got to find the open door. It might be an internship, and it could be a summer internship. I just hired a summer intern for writing at my job. But there's also these things, they call them internships, but it's fully paid, and at the end you get to keep working there. That's what I did. So I went in and kind of at the bottom, you know, I took a pay cut from being a contractor to go into the government. And then, but you knew every year, as long as you showed up and were decent, you would kind of start moving up the pay ranges. So while you still have the Hopkins, the college, that experience is still open for you and you can apply to those internships, that's the time to be looking for stuff like that.
That's great advice.
I'll say one more thing. What it comes down to, it still ends up being a marriage of, you know, you have to go through the process of getting in and figuring it all out. But when the job clicks and the place clicks for you, you go to an interview and it goes well. It's just like anywhere. And my brother-in-law had this experience recently. He's been asking me this for years. How do I get in? How do I get in? How do I get in? And this job came up and it was like, man, that is the job for you. It is perfect for you. And he applied and he went to the interview and they were like, you're perfect for us. And he said, I feel the same way. And now he works there. So that's possible. It's not that bad if you just get in the habit of trying to work through USAJOBS and do the research. But I could talk about this all day and I would volunteer too. So if anyone wants to bounce their ideas off of me. We could do this again, or they could, I'd be happy to talk more about it.
Oh, terrific. Thank you so much, Matt. That's great advice. I'm going to jump over to Catherine because I know, Catherine, that you had a terrific sort of way in as well through an internship. Could you tell folks a little bit about that internship that you did with NCI?
Sure. So like Matt mentioned, a good way to get a foot in the door is to do an internship with the government. And one really excellent one that I did to get my foot in the door is called the National Cancer Institute Communications Fellowship. The National Cancer Institute is part of NIH. So it is a 1-year paid fellowship, and I would say the pay is quite generous for an internship, where it's open to grad students or recent graduates of grad programs. And you spend 1 year in a communications office at the National Cancer Institute. And at the end of that 1 year, many of the fellows are hired into a federal position in a communications office. And many of the fellows are science writers, but other fellows are into other aspects of communication. I did it. It was invaluable to start getting clips for myself and just start getting my feet wet in government communications. It didn't, for me, immediately lead to a federal position, but it certainly helped on my resume when I finally did. So that's one thing that I would highly recommend if you're interested in working at NIH or with biomedical science.
Great tip. Thank you. And Jennifer, do you have anything to add from the Nist perspective? Any tips of the trade for finding a job?
Yeah, I mean, Matt's right. The USA jobs system has gotten a lot better. I just went through it when I was applying for my current position. I was already at Nist, but coming into the new job, it is much better. But you still want to look for, I think, if you're looking for writer editor, the code is 1082. You'll see a lot of jobs under that we all have job codes, and a public affairs specialist is a 1035. So you'll start to learn some of that lingo that you do. And I think there is a federal program that's an internship program. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'll try and look it up, but it's where we brought in, I know at least our graphic designer came in through, she was finishing up grad school. And so was able to, it extends, it doesn't end when you graduate necessarily. You still, that year gets through it. But for us, we've been very fortunate to work with our our HR office to make sure that writing samples play a big role in evaluation, because most of the time HR wants you to use a certain system where people answer questions and they get ranked according to the answers, and that people may have preferences, or they may get extra points for their different aspects of their background. And so that can, knock people out of the running, give other people a leg up. So we've been able to make sure that the writing sample someone submits to us, because you could tell me in your resume that, oh yeah, I've done this, I'm a great science writer, but if I can't see that, it makes a big difference. So for us, writing samples actually, when they ask you to include an attachment, or they ask you to include a writing sample, make sure you do it, and make sure you're submitting the right kind of sample. I've had people, we get very specific on what we ask for. So reading very carefully what it's looking for and tailoring your application. Don't have a generic resume. Make sure you're looking at what that job application or job opening is looking for. And actually, I have been enjoying reading Ask a Manager, which is a blog, but she's got Allison Green, has really great advice for people putting together their resume. And then just dealing in the working world. There's some really bad bosses out there. You don't have to take that. There's more out there that are good. And that's a good resource I've been seeing lately.
And we can tell you're a great boss. Matt, any additional words from you, Matt Dozier?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first questions I saw in the chat was about transitioning from contracting to federal position. So I was a contractor at NOAA for 8.5 years. I was a contractor. No, when I took throughout the whole time that I did the Hopkins Science Writing program, in many ways, I was doing the program with a view towards becoming a, I think at that time in my mind, a real science writer, and transitioning over to a more like a publication or a journalistic outlet that was, more exciting to me. But one of the things that kept resurfacing as we were going through the program was like, things are kind of tough around here in 2011, 2000, 8, 9, 10, and so I think over time I was like, I get to do a lot of cool stuff here, and this is a valid and valuable way to spend my time and spend my career. So I think I kind of became more like, okay, maybe the federal, workforce is a good place for me to continue to try and grow. But, as a contractor, there's certainly, things are a little more tenuous. I think that some of the benefits of federal employment don't necessarily get extended to contractors. I've seen a lot of folks, given notice, given marching orders, because budgets fluctuate and things, administrations come and go, and contractors are much easier to hire, but much easier to fire as well. So I was certainly, like, after being with the same program, in a position where they've treated us pretty much like employees, like, and you'll find I think a wide variation from agency to agency, and I think that's something to ask, if you can talk to other people who are in a given program or agency, and you're looking at a contract, science writing or other position there, try and talk to some other people and be like, how do they treat their contractors? Because some places treat their contractors like crap, like second class citizens. Like, you can't do anything, you can't talk to anyone without getting the federal managers express permission, that sort of thing. And then some agencies, some programs are a little bit more, it's more integrated. You're more a part of the team, rather than just like you're there to work for the customer, that sort of thing. So you'll find, I think, different atmospheres in a contract position. I think that the pay can certainly be competitive with federal positions. The benefits are competitive often, and it's nice. There's some flexibility that you're afforded that you might not be as a federal employee. But the transition from the contract side to the federal side, I mean, I know there are a few people who've had success in it, but I think more often you find the kind of like wait for a full-time equivalent, an FTE position to open up so you can then apply for your own job, but in federal form. I mean, that can take a long time, and even managers with the best intentions, I think, sometimes can't get that ball rolling. And so that ball was supposed to be rolling for me for probably about 5 years, and eventually I was like, I like this program, I love the people I work with, but you keep an eye out for the USAJOBS positions, and I kept applying to them, and eventually got a good opportunity at DOE, and was like, sorry, this is too good an opportunity to pass up. I will say there are, like I said, success stories. People do make that jump. I know people at DOE who have made that jump from contract position and now are federal, full-time employees. But I find it to have been more rare than you'd like, really.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
sure.
I'm going to have to cut you off because we are nearing the top of the hour, but this is all really fantastic advice. And I'll just add that I've seen over the years, just my sort of observation, I don't know if it's true, but that a shift from regular full-time jobs for the government toward the more contracting jobs. And it's probably particularly true at certain agencies more true at certain agencies than others. But thank you, Warren Duffy, for popping into the chat and answering some of the questions pertaining to contracting. It's, kind of another mysterious beast. So I am, we have like 1 more minute left, and I want to maybe do a quick lightning round to end out our time here and ask you all if you could perhaps leave us, each of you take 20 seconds or so to leave us with one sort of takeaway piece of information about your work for the government, and what makes it gratifying, and what you would tell somebody who's interested in this sort of job. And I'll just go across my screen, starting with Catherine. One
So
takeaway for us.
I would say what's gratifying about the job is being very close to cutting edge science and getting to know about it as it's coming out, and being close to scientists and being able to learn from them and interact with them, and then communicate that to the public. It's a great job. Others have said, it's a great job for work-life balance. Typically, these are 9-to-5 jobs. There's stable employment, great pay and benefits. And I'd also say persistence is key when you're applying through USAJOBS. Don't be discouraged by rejection. It doesn't necessarily mean you're not qualified. It's like Jennifer said, there's a lot of hiring from within agencies. So everyone I know who's in science communications, not everyone, but many of the people I've talked to in science communications at NIH have said the same thing and had the same experience as me, in that they applied many, many times to many jobs before they actually got their job. I applied probably to 6 different jobs before I got mine. So just be persistent, keep trying.
Wow. Thank you for that insight, Catherine. And Matt Dozier, some lessons to leave us by?
Yeah. I mean, I think as I mentioned, when I was earlier in my career, I think I was trying to run away from federal, the role, the public affairs, public information side of things, so I could be a real science writer. And I think over time, my view on that has shifted. And I mean, when you're working for a federal agency, I mean, is there bureaucracy? Of course. Are there frustrations? Yes. But are there opportunities to get that, like Catherine said, that direct link to interesting, committed, really, really smart people doing really important work, and they're on your team in a lot of ways. So, it is not pulling teeth to get your sources to respond to you. It's like, hey, we're gonna do a piece on your work, and it's like, oh yes, great. Like, how can I help? What do you need? You have that ability to, get as much as you need, as much as you want, in terms of the content from the people that you're talking to, and the stories really abound. And so I think it can be way more exciting than you might ever expect, and more rewarding, and a really fulfilling place to have a career.
Thank you, Matt. And Jennifer.
Yeah, I second everything that Matt and Catherine said. The 9-to-5, it's not working out that way with the position I'm in now, but we do strive for work-life balance, absolutely, but you're going to work hard in those hours. And what's really great about the work is that you're supporting in public affairs, you're supporting the researchers, you're supporting journalists, you're supporting the agency's mission. And if it's got a mission you can believe in, that's just really a fantastic thing to be able to do, to know that the work you're doing is helping these other folks do some really great things. And it's very rewarding, very challenging, and exciting, as they said.
Cool. And Matt Ward.
I want to say that when you write your pieces at Hopkins there, and you take it to workshop, and you take it to your professors, and you poured your heart into it, and it comes back with all these suggestions or all these ideas about what's not coming through, And, I know I had the experience of, that just, well, I thought this was done. I thought I'd finished this already. And then I'm going to embark on this painful edit of my own work to try to make it better. Hold on to that and take a deep breath and accept it and try to roll with it and try to learn from it. I use that experience every day at work. Most of what I do is long form editing, and I use that workshop editing experience and that sort of openness to say, this isn't actually all that good, but it could be better. The lead might be somewhere else, or you're not being very clear here. I use that experience and that sort of device of fixing sort of the mechanics of a long piece constantly. So it's a really good thing to go through. For me, it was at Hopkins. I use it all the time at work.
Well, thank you for that endorsement, Matt. I promise everybody I didn't pay him to say that. Appreciate it. Well, this has been a super illuminating evening for me as well as the audience, I'm sure. Thank you all. Thank you, Catherine and Matt and Jennifer. Really appreciate you being so generous with your time this evening. And thank you all for tuning in. And I hope you've learned as much as I have. Have a good evening, everybody.